Okay, in this video I'm going to kind of walk you through narrative writing. These are some of the key pieces that can create effective narrative writing inside of classrooms, can really support kids in their learning how to write a narrative piece. Now this is not everything that can go into this. I'm not going to go in and touch upon all of the author's craft that you could add into these. So it's just more of how do we plan, help kids plan, prep, which that's a big thing for me, is teaching them how to plan and prepare, because that plan really helps alleviate a lot of issues as you move forward. Then pen to paper, how do we add dialogue, how do we do some of these key things that are super important to this narrative, and understanding the genre of narrative writing. So let's jump right in. First of all, narrative writing conveys real or imagined experiences to inform, instruct, persuade, or entertain. You can still do all those things inside of a narrative. So it's important to kind of point that out and to kind of take a look. There are different components or different types of narrative writing. So we're going to explore that a little bit inside of this. So first of all, types and characteristics of a narrative. It's important for you to understand this and for your kids. So first of all, narrative writing types. You have your informational. You can have narratives that are informing. They're doing it in a narrative format. They're going to have that beginning, the middle, and end, the basic plot formats of narrative writing. You have your characters, a climax, all these kinds of things are built into that. You can also have an imaginary. Some people call it lots. Imaginary basically means it has a broad scope of different things that can fall underneath that. And then personal, just meaning that it is a personal experience that somebody has lived and went through. And there's a few other ones underneath that as well, because these are like basic three umbrellas. Characteristics of each of them. So to be a narrative, you have to have sequence of events. You've got to have those sequencing of events. You've got to have characters that are behaving and interacting inside of this. The setting, it's either real or an imaginary setting, but there has to be a setting. Typically, there's vivid details that are included inside of this. That's where the entertainment piece really comes into this. And description of places, objects, people, and actions, and narrative craft techniques. For example, like dialogue, quotations, those kinds of things are happening inside of this. So yeah, good stuff there. Now, these are just some of the characteristics. These are the main characteristics to kind of know and understand about narrative writing. Now, taking a look here at when teaching narratives, these are some main points that you want to be teaching inside. These are like the three main buckets, three things that you're kind of, and I'm going to go through and give a kind of a scope and sequence that would be like bare bones of what you could do. But this is just some main buckets. So before we get to those bare bones come from these three buckets. First of all, you want to make sure your students understand the importance of creating a clear sequence of events. That's a big thing about narratives. Kids like to jump around on them, and they don't keep them in order. And that they understand that narratives are time-bound. Big thing about this is some students will try to write about too much all at once. You really want to have to focus them in on that. We'll talk about that here in a second. Make sure your students understand how to use dialogue and details to bring their characters and settings alive. That's the big thing about narrative pieces, is bringing characters alive, settings alive. That's huge. Huge. Make sure that your students understand that narrative writing is about self-expression. Now, this is probably the overarching bucket and what makes narrative writing so great. It is about self-expression. It is about conveying things to your readers. It helps students explore their own experiences, things that they've lived through, especially personal narratives. And you're exploring your own experiences, and you're finding out that other people have had those same experiences, and that is very a very therapeutic thing for kids to understand and know. They're exploring their own thoughts and feelings, and they're connecting their thoughts and feelings to other people and realizing that other people have thoughts and feelings. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different. Different perspectives and sharing those experiences with others. This is what makes it so powerful for every classroom to do. And so powerful to read them as well. So these are the big buckets. Like I said, those are the overarching things. These are kind of the big buckets. First of all, introduction to narrative writing is one of the most important things to do. They have to understand what narratives are, right? So you have to teach lessons that help kids understand what parts are inside of a narrative, what makes an effective narrative, what is a narrative, what makes it do these things. So you want to begin with these types of strategies. You want to be teaching them how to plan and organize the structure of that. So you have to teach them how to generate ideas, how to capture special moments, how to different stories and maps and plans, how to deconstruct the prompt. So big buckets. You've got to teach them, first of all, how to understand what a narrative genre is, how to plan and organize this, how to tackle the beginning of a narrative, how to tackle the beginning a draft and expanding a draft. So once we get our beginning going, once we start drafting, how do we go in and then re-attack our draft? Because that's really what it's about. Once they get writing, you're teaching authors craft. You're having them go back in and revisit, go back and revisit. Hey, look right here. Once you get to the climax, you want to make people see, hear, feel, taste, touch, right? And then they have to go back and revisit their draft and refine it, make it better. Showing transitions, how they work, ending a narrative effectively, how to revise and edit a narrative. These are these big buckets. These are 7 big things that you want to do inside of narrative writing. I broke these down further. Each of these, you could have probably like 15 lessons for that. Obviously, we don't have time for that. Nope. But I went through, took these big buckets. Like I said, it could be more here. I narrowed those down, put them in a scope and sequence for you. That kind of gives you a general idea. There's basically 11 lessons here. It would be a little bit more. It's more like 15 lessons when you go through it all. However, it's basically 11 main things that are happening inside of this. The first one is exploring the main types of a narrative. I'm just going to jump into these just for honor of time. You can pause the video if you want to and look right here and look at them straight through. But I'm going to jump in and kind of move through each of these real quick and talk a little bit about that. First of all, remember I said the first big thing is to help kids understand the main types of narratives. We want to make sure that we're discussing the types of narratives. We want them to understand however many that you want to really explore. If you really only want to focus on a personal narrative, then that's fine. But helping them understand that there's multiple ones. I'd say you really want to talk about that. There's 3 main buckets of these types of narratives. You have your imaginative, your nonfiction, your personal narrative. So in this one, you're just discussing the types of narratives. All of the documents you see up here and even more will be shared in Google Docs. And I have the different, all the resources are going to be right inside of it that you can teach from. For everything you see here and more will be inside of that. So you can see here, it just walks through and talks about this. If I'm teaching this lesson with kids, I'm just doing a think aloud with them. I'm talking about this. They're probably, from that think aloud, they're gaining a little bit of information. I probably would write on here some of the other stories that we've read this year that they're familiar with already. I would plug them in here. And that's going to really make this be more authentic and also go along with their learning that they already had. So you can see here, these are just some of the boxes that explain what, a personal narrative is. And then these are some examples for that too. So what's great here is you really want them to explore and find out what these genre types are and understand that. So here you have an example here that has that. The other thing is you want to explore this more by reading some other examples. And that's where I said I would just write some of the ones we've already read. So if I've already read some of these, there's no point in rereading them. I just hold the book up, write the name down, hold the book up, write the name down, hold the book up, write the name down. But you can see there are some other examples that I've put inside of the resources for you. Here is a Be Brave, a Field Bee at Work. It's just an example, a shorter text, and you could read it together and talk about what it would fall under. You could do this with any text. You could pull up some of your iReady toolbox lessons you've done that fit this, and then you could have them together figure out where it would be. So depending on how deep you want to go with that one. But what's important about that is they understand that there's 3 different main types. So the next one is breaking a narrative structure down by color. So I know a lot of you do this already. I really highly encourage you to do this. Putting some examples up. I definitely would always start off by doing these out loud myself first with the students, or just me doing it, and then I might include them too. But I'm definitely going to go in and I'm going to read a text. You could take snapshots of some of the books that you've already read this year. You can just take pictures and put it up on there. What you're trying to do is you're exposing them to the structure of the genre because it's extremely important. This can be done with any text type, like I said. I like to use good literature or previous student texts. So if you have any stories from last year, you could pop those up here. I'll show you an example of that here in a second. What you're trying to really highlight is you should already know how you want your how you would want your narratives to fall out. So what I mean by that is, let me see if I have a blank spot here. So I've got a blank spot right here. I'll draw real quick. What I mean by that is you should already know how you want them to organize their text. So for me, I always like to have my kids do it like this. A real quick framework box, which would look very similar to this right here. You'd have 1 paragraph, 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs, 4 paragraphs. This paragraph is where the climax is going to be. I always call it a double focus, which I'll talk more about, but they'd write something here, and then they have their main event. So my point is this. You want to know, like, here's where their lead's going to be. They're going to plan their lead. They're going to plan their beginning, middle, and end. Doesn't mean they only have to have 4 paragraphs, but it's a way for them to kind of delineate that out. So you should already know what you want them to do. You know if you want them to have 4 paragraphs, if you want them to have a lead, beginning, middle, and end. At the bare minimum, you want a beginning, middle, and end. Okay? I would include a lead there. If you have some other author's craft that you know you're going to be putting in your lessons later on, you'd want to include that in. That way you could be like, okay, so right here I can see the author did, the lead, and then I would put that a certain color. I would say that's going to be red. I'd highlight it red. I'd have them highlight it red. I'd say right here's the beginning, and we'd highlight that purple. Here's the middle, and then we'd highlight that green, and then I would put like a box around the climax. Because that's a very, very important thing to point out. And then here's the ending. And if you're doing any other sorts of author craft that you're going to be teaching later on, you want to point that out at this point. What this does is it helps them understand how to map and go through what makes a good, strong narrative. So this is a fantastic thing to do. I know a lot of you already do the color coding system already, which is great. Just know what it is that you want them, what is a perfect narrative for you. Break that down by color, and then you're going to teach that. You're going to have them then go in and color that. So that's the big thing there. I like to use good literature for this. This is Ralph Fletcher, a story from him. This is Marshfield of Dreams. It's a book that has all narratives all the way through it, and it's throughout his entire life. It's fantastic stories. So Ralph Fletcher, Marshfield of Dreams. And I also like to use stories that students have turned in previous, and just pop those up. We go in and highlight those together. So I typically start off highlighting it and then have them do one. Working in groups, you can do that too as well. It's wise to use the rubric with this. So that's kind of what I just shared with you. You already know what you want on your rubric. You're going to be using your rubric to highlight these kinds of things here, okay? That's going to be what you'll do for that. How to generate writing topics or how to write for a prompt. So after they already understand what's going to be in a narrative, the biggest thing is most kids don't know what to write. They don't know what to write about. This is where this piece comes in. You're basically trying to help them figure out how to generate ideas. The way that I always go about doing that is you have like alphabet soup where you have the alphabet and then you just create its adventures. They write all the different adventures they've done, all these different things that they can do from this. This resource is inside of that document as well. The other thing I like to do is have them create lists. Have them create lists as well. Sorry. So in this one, you want them, what I'm saying is generate lists, like list of funniest things that ever happened to them, list of best Christmas presents, list of best sporting events. So you're just having them create lists, a bunch of different lists of a bunch of different things, like funniest things, weirdest things, most awkward things. Those are going to be lists that they'll eventually pull one of those ideas out and write about. So there's lots of different ways about going about doing that. So you have different ways for them to generate ideas. You also have the fact that you might be just telling them to write to a prompt, so you have to show them how to break a prompt down. With a narrative prompt, it's much easier. You're going to have them read the prompt. You're going to teach them to underline the important things. So pretty simple on that one. But those are really the two things. You have to teach them how to generate ideas. I typically say, like I said, lists is a big one that a lot of people utilize. So because there's lots of different lists. The other thing you can do is have them draw a picture of like their neighborhood, and then put X's where stuff has happened, because most kids, they wrecked their bike over at Johnny's house or whatever. But those are where your big moments are happening in your life, or they, could draw a picture of like Columbus if they do a lot of traveling or something. So here's an example from a kid right here. This kid wrote about, obviously there's some spelling issues in this one, but it came from his funny list. He had a list of funny things that happened to him, and one time he ate a lot of beans and was farting that night. So this is a pretty funny story about how he ate beans and farted. Here's some different prompts that you can use. You have your imaginary narratives, your nonfiction, personal narrative prompts. Again, this is inside of that resource I shared with you. So you can have kids write from prompts, or you can teach them how to generate ideas from lists. Those are the two typical ways. There are other ones to add to this, but I've found lists to be very effective and very time efficient. We're all about time efficiency as well too. Teach your narrative step process. Focus on a moment. That's huge. Most kids try to write about an entire event. You have to really focus them down. Narratives are kind of real succinct and real precise. So focus on a moment. I know creating a title can be challenging for some kids, but it often helps keep those sequence in order. So creating a title, building a graphic, adding your notes, plan your lead, know your climax, build suspense, plan your ending, whoo, all those things. But when you do that, you're really doing this as you're teaching them how to use your graphic organizer that you've selected. Most of this is happening in a graphic organizer. And you can see it's a lot of steps. That's why I said the planning phase is so important to writing, because this is a lot once you put it down on a piece of paper and think about it. So everyone has their own way to write, but you want to introduce them to a plan that makes sense to you. I showed you my plan earlier where I like to have boxes across from the little funnel. Yours may look different. Everybody's may look different. But just pick the one that you want, and then you're going to introduce them to it, and it's going to pull you through most of these things. Know how you attack a writing piece and detail that out and guide them through that process, okay? So creating a narrative, this is kind of a way that you create, even if you do your organizer, you're going to be probably adjusting this a little bit to fit yours, but this always worked for me. So right here you have creating a narrative, write a working title, make a quick sketch. That's where your organizer comes in. Add quick notes. That's what you're doing on an organizer. Write an interesting beginning. That's what you're doing on your organizer. Include narrative transitions. That's what you would do when you're revising. And finish with a memorable ending. Again, that would be happening at the end. So really what we're doing is this, these first couple of steps are all happening on an organizer. This is something you can give to kids, and it helps them understand step by step how they can work through a narrative. It also can help you as you're planning and instructing too. So the big thing is you want to teach these steps, how to do these different things over here. You want to do it on a graphic organizer. Here's one that I would do. Here's a kid that actually did this. So you can see this kid right here, it's called double focus because they take a bigger event like spring break. So this kid wrote spring break here. But then I talked to him about, no, we need to pick a specific moment, something that a specific moment that happens in like a minute or less. And so he put, so in this one he said spring break, and here he wrote Jurassic Park. So he wrote about a smaller moment of time. This person did the same kind of thing here. Basically, you're taking a bigger moment, you're funneling it down to a smaller moment, and that's your dip, your climax. That's the part where everybody loses their stomach. It's like the, oh. So you have your lead, your beginning, your middle, your end. And in the middle, that's the most important. That's why I always have my funnel going down to that one, because that's the moment that everybody's waiting for. They're waiting for you to wreck your bike, you to break your arm. They're all waiting for that big moment, for the main character to learn that they're an evil person. That all happens in the climax. And that's why that funnels down into that middle, that main part. So this is the plan that I do. This is the organizer that I teach. Yours may look different, and that's okay. They all have the same premise, though. They're teaching what you value inside of narrative writing. I value them writing about small moments, understanding what the moment that everybody is waiting for in their writing, and then building up to that moment. Some people will use story mountains. They'll have a mountain that forms this way. Your climax is at the top. You have your lead here, your beginning, then your middle and your climax, and then your end. Perfectly fine to do it that way too. There's lots of different ways to do it. You just really want to have a plan before you embark on your journey so you can teach them that at this point. So you have that double focus. You want to teach to draft and plan on the same page. What I mean by that is you want them to draft it right here and then immediately start writing right below that. So if your organizer is so complex that they've got to print it off, that's okay. They can have it next to them. It's great if you can teach kids to just draw the organizer out, then they're more independent without you. And they can, once they finish one, they can move right on to another. So I find that to be beneficial. If they plan it right here, then they start writing right below it. Then they can see what their plan is as they go. 4 or more paragraphs. 4 paragraphs at a minimum for sure. I think that most 5th, 6th graders can handle that. 3 would probably be a minimum, beginning, middle, and end, because you could include your lead into your beginning. That'd be perfectly fine on that piece as well. All right, so next step here. I'm just going to kind of walk you through real quick what that organizer would look like. So like I said, it is a double focus. You have the portion right here. I always draw it a big box like that, like this actually. So you've got your P1, paragraph 1. This would be like the lead that would happen right here. Your P2, this is where we're going to say who, what, when, where, why, those kinds of things. That's going to help build your setting. We'll talk about that here in a second. Like I said, it's a double focus. They take their bigger moment, and then you want to have them write something that's smaller, something that happens in a brief amount of time. That's going to be called their climax, obviously. That's the moment that's most important in their story. That is their true middle of their story, but there's things that are going to happen inside of here. And then your ending. So they write down what type of ending they want, what type of lead they're going to use. They're going to put down some notes on what happened at the beginning, some quick notes on the end. They can even just draw pictures there too. They don't have to write words. It's completely up to you how they go about attacking your organizer. This is what my organizer would look like. Yours might look a little bit different that you would teach with kids. Perfectly fine either way you go about slicing that up. Next one is teaching leads. So after you've organized it, after you've showed them, or after you've first, they understand what the genre is. They've explored the genre a little bit. They've now planned one. They've got some ideas. They've now kind of planned one out. You then want to teach them how to write a lead, okay? And this one has 6 different leads. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. We're pretty familiar with leads. This does have examples of leads, though, from, like, for example, this one's from the book The Hobbit. So if you have texts already that you've read, you can pop those up, show the kids what those leads are. You can also use previous students' leads to show them as well. I'd add a couple in here. I'd add start with 3 questions. That's a great one that kids like to use too. It's not on this page right here, but they can start with 3 questions. 3 steps for writing a beginning. This is actually what you can show. This is how you can teach them to do it. So first of all, use one of the 6 main ways. So then they pick one. Here's an example. Give the reader a clue where the action is. So where is it taking place? Add more sentences here. So this is an example that you could actually teach, a lesson that you could teach in front of the kids, giving those examples. This is a planning sheet that they can use to plan out their lead. It could be this detailed or not. I've also placed some other ones inside of the resource for you of some PowerPoints that I've used in the past to teach leads as well. Inside of this, you're basically saying, you want them to answer who, when, where, what, and in detail. So this is a way they can work through those narrative leads or narrative beginnings and leads. All right, so that was for narrative leads. Now let's talk a little bit about this here. I kind of blew up this double focus plan. Like I said, this is where they plan it in, the middle, the climax. They can start their first paragraph could just be their lead where they're working their introduction. So like, for example, here, this would just be the lead. Then right here is at the actual beginning. I do like to break the lead off from the beginning, but this is just more of my author preference. You can totally smash these together perfectly fine. They could start with 3 questions. They could say, have you ever lost a tooth? Have you ever wrecked a bike? For a story that's all about bike wrecks and breaking a tooth off. You could start with 3 questions, and then they can jump to the beginning. The beginning is where you really want to say where it's taking place, what they're doing, what you're doing. So you're answering who, what, when, and where in this scenario here. So this is a way that you can plan that. So you can take a look at that as well inside of this. Kids often struggle about giving in more details, elaborating on things. There's specific lessons here inside of this that you can take a look at, but this is teaching them how to show, and show, not tell, and add suspense into their writing. So you're going to be teaching them how to build their characters and their settings. And this is what it would be just telling somebody. Shanice was very shy. This is how they'd be showing. We're basically teaching kids how to use their senses. What could you see about Shanice? Hear, feel, taste, touch, smell. And then you use those questions. You ask yourself those questions and you elaborate on Shanice. Same thing about Rusty the dog. What can you see, hear, feel, taste, touch, smell on Rusty? So that's what you're doing. You're doing the same thing for the character, same thing for the settings. So if they answer these questions about their characters or settings, then they've got some great details as they're writing and revising their narrative to add those inside of it. So you use that same technique for creating suspense. So remember where I was talking about the climax? You have some people use a story mountain like this, and right here's the climax, that big moment that everybody's waiting for. Right before that moment, that's where you want to teach kids to slow their story down and tell their readers everything they could see, hear, feel, taste, touch, and smell. So right before that moment, you want them to answer all these questions. So here's an example. I leaned over and punched my sister in the arm. Well, the climax of the story is the moment he punches his sister in the arm. As soon as you give that to your reader, your story's over, and everybody's like, oh. But right before you punch her in the arm, That's where you want to say what you're thinking, feeling, smelling, touching, all of these different senses. So here's an example with suspense. I leaned over. Sweat poured down my face as I thought about it. It was perfect. My mother's back was turned as she did the dishes, and my sister sat with her arm towards me, coloring in her book. Ouch! She yelled as my hand slammed into her arm like a sledgehammer. So you can see this is an example with no suspense. This is an example with suspense. And all I did is I slowed my story down. Right, instead of just saying I punched her in the arm, right before I punch, I answer all these questions. You do the same thing for your characters in your setting. Same thing. Boom. So before you introduce us to a character, you think about all these different things. Before you introduce us to a setting, you think about all these different things. And then you tell us what the setting was by explaining all those cool things about it. So this is a strategy that really makes much, much better narratives. It's quite simple because they're just literally stopping what could you see, what you could hear, think, taste, touch, smell, think, all those kinds of things. This is just another example. You know, writers build suspense by finding their big moment and then telling their readers everything they could see, hear, feel, taste, touch, smell, and think. So this is an example of how you could just bring a past student's writing up. Right here's where this student built suspense. I could go in and highlight where they added these same types of details for the character and for a setting. So same process, same thing you do. This is always important to point out. Anything that you teach, like if I'm teaching something on how to do this, I would then give them directive to go into the writing and find it. So for example, in your writing today, I'd like you to locate your climax. Oops, misspelling there, it should be AX. Go in and find your climax and then add suspense right before it. So give them specific things to go out and do. So after you teach a lesson, make a slide like this that tells them exactly what to do and leave it up and keep reminding them, hey, go back and revise today. Today I want you to find your climax, and then I want you to slow your story down right before it. Tell us what you could see, hear, feel, taste, touch, and smell. Or go find your character right before you introduce us to your character. Tell us what you could see, hear, feel, taste, touch, smell about them. Teach them how to use transitions and dialogue. I'm not going to go into this too much because it really explains itself right here. You can pause the video and take a look at it. This resource is also inside of the Google folder I'm sharing. You do want to teach transitions. They are helpful as they transition from paragraph to paragraph and throughout their narrative piece. So you have some different examples that you can walk through kids. Again, you don't just want to hand this to them and tell them to go do it. You want to give them an example. So you could do it with student examples, with authors examples, and again, I have some examples inside of the Google folder for you. But you want to point out the different kinds, show that to them. This would be something that they can keep inside of their writer's notebook or on their desk as they're writing their narrative. These are some different transitions that they can use. You also can give some examples of how they can go in and find these. So here, inside of the Google folder I shared with you, there are some pages where they can go find some of these transitions. It's some examples already pre-made for you. You want to teach them how to use those transitions, dialogues, like I said. Review what dialogue is. So this last one was on transitions. This is dialogue. This is a big one. Most kids get dialogue, are not accurate with their dialogue, so you want to make sure that you go through and teach this. So here's your different ways to do this. Use quotation marks to show characters' exact words. Use a comma, exclamation point, question mark at the end of the character statement. So these are the basic rules that go along with that. And then you want them to understand, when you're adding and using dialogue, why you're doing that. Why are you adding and using dialogue? So they need it for a reason, to add dialogue to a story, to make it better, plan ahead, use the right words, those kinds of things. Understanding these, for example, this one, start a new paragraph each time a different character speaks. A lot of kids don't know that. They don't know they need a new paragraph every time a character speaks. When a character makes two or more statements, complete sentences, use a capital letter to begin each sentence. So just some basic rules around adding dialogue. You want to bring in some examples from texts, bring in past student work as well. I have each of those inside of that Google form for you. So just some extra information around dialogue, building that in there. Inside of the Google folder, like I've been saying, there are examples. These are some different PowerPoints that have some things on dialogue as well. Options for ending. So now we're nearing the end. So after you plan it, after you start the lead, you let kids start writing, right? And then as you teach each of these lessons, you're having them jump back into their piece and improve them. That's really that revision piece that's happening inside of it. Just so you get it like a framework and how that would work in my classroom. I would teach the beginning lessons, and then I'd let them start writing. As they're writing, I'm teaching these lessons. And as I teach them, they go in to make their pieces better. They revise their pieces. So when we'd get to the ending, I would teach a mini lesson on endings, discuss the different ways to end a narrative, show examples like I've been talking about. I love the reoccurring detail ending. That's my favorite. So these are different ways. Note a feeling, remember a character, think about the story, or get to the point. This one not down here is reoccurring detail, something happened at the beginning to the end. They do show an example right here for you. So write an end for a narrative. Here's an example where you could read one of these together, and then you could give an example of how you could write an ending for one of these. Okay? So these are just some different ways you can end a narrative. Pretty basic on that one as well. Revising techniques. I like to teach revising two ways. I like to teach to revise the entire narrative, but I want them to go in and improve paragraphs as well. This right here is a nice strategy. This is from Rewards Writing. I love it. It says, have them reread the paragraph. Does your paragraph sound good? If not, fix it. Can you combine some sentences? Okay. Can you omit any words inside of that? Can you shorten some words out to make it stronger? Do you need to replace any words? Do you have the word nice in there? If you've got nice in there, replace it with a better word. Can you expand it? Can you make it better? Can you use some sentence expansion techniques to make your paragraph better? So I like to teach at the paragraph level, and I also like to teach it at the overall narrative level. And I always have I make them, when they're writing, you have that rubric out in front of them as well. Because that was really what we're ultimately going to be grading it all from anyways, okay? So those are some pieces for narrative writing. Hopefully that's helpful. And you have lots of those resources too.